Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. It's been a little while since I covered any RPG material on this channel, so let's rectify that. But first, here's a question for you. Do you like Dwarf Fortress? How about Deep Rock Galactic? Any fans out there? Do any of you have a book of grudges that you're having difficulty crossing out because you just keep adding in new names to it over and over again? I got the book for you. This is By This Axe. It is for the Adventurer Conqueror King System, written by Alexander Macris, the creator of Adventurer Conqueror King and of the Autark Publishing Company, which this is made by. I interviewed him back in the day for the Ascendant release of his Ascendant RPG. This one is all about the dwarves, specifically from the perspective of his own campaign setting, the Oran Empire. The whole thing, 270 pages, full color, in my case hardcover. Some really good binding on it too. Don't know if you can see it from here, but this is a nice solid book, as you would expect from Dwarven construction. I mean, you know, only the best, right? The whole thing goes into very good detail, starting from the very first chapter. Well, the first chapter is the introduction, of course. Then the second chapter goes into the description of the Dwarven civilization, biology, ethnicity, culture, all this stuff from the perspective of an in-setting narrator. In this case, it's a guy named Circanius, who's a sage from the Tower of Knowledge in the Oran Empire. He's the self-proclaimed inventor of dwarology, or the study of dwarves. So this is interesting. It makes it a fun read because, you know, this kind of thing can get very, very dry, as you can imagine, if you just lay facts out in encyclopedic form. Here you have this guy who is going on an anthropological study of the different Dwarven civilizations in his own in the campaign setting, of which there are two primary ones in two different mountain ranges. And here it gives you two things. One, it's fun. It's a fun read. And two, it also provides an excuse for ignoring anything that doesn't work for your own campaign setting, as the saying goes, you know, every campaign a law unto itself. Because he is obviously injecting his own bias into things. He's a bit like, you know, he's not quite a scientist, he's more like a natural philosopher in the old style of things. And you get the impression at certain points that the dwarves are fucking with him at times. So this really gives you the ability to go into there, decide if certain things don't fit with your pre-existing campaign setting. There you go. You have a perfect excuse to pick and choose what you want as you see fit. Also, it gives some interesting things to do because not only does it go into detail, but also there's certain facts that the dwarves, being a very long-lived and, you know, meticulous record-keeping race, have that don't necessarily agree with what he thinks he knows about history and stuff. So he's like, okay, this bit about the elves burying their dead and worshiping chaos gods at one point in their history, that's just crazy. I mean, who the hell would believe that's got to be some kind of weird myth thing? Or yeah, well, those of you who played Secrets of the Nether City, that particular adventure, well, you know a bit more about this than he does. You've got great selection of stuff here, even stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think you might need, but it's great to have it as, you know, just fluff and give you an idea of the kinds of people these, you know, these dwarves are. It treats the dwarves not as simply another player character race, but as another species, in the sense, like, if humans are horses, elves are zebras, this is an example from the book, dwarves would be like donkeys. And, you know, yeah, they can interbreed, but they're not the same thing at all. And they act differently. They build different civilizations based on their own particular wants and needs. And the different relationships they have with other peoples, you know, other fantasy human races out there, is reflected in this. And also their customs, naming conventions, the political and legal system of the dwarves. Lots of filibustering. There's actually a class in here called the Dwarven Rhetor that's basically the equivalent of a human bard, but instead of, you know, playing music and, you know, knowing lots of ancient histories and lore and stuff like that, they're really, really, really good at legal shit. In fact, some of their abilities, I'll get to them when I get to the actual character classes, but one of their abilities is literally having the ability to put their audience to sleep simply by being that deliberately boring. You can actually have certain effects on people like that. It's an interesting class. There's a lot of stuff here. You have, you know, different architecture and engineering, how they decorate their vaults, how they build them, where they build them, the kinds of, like, what do they eat? Always know those kinds of questions. If you're going to have a species that primarily lives underground, how do they provide food for themselves? Do they use beasts of burden? Do they import certain materials from the surface world? Do they has that their main interaction? What kind of what kind of crimes are what kind of things are illegal to do in dwarven society? What are the taboos? Certain things, like there are certain classes we'll get to as well that have a certain relationship with fungi that has had some very, very, very profound negative effects on dwarven civilization. That those ones are just exiled. Their equivalent of druids are not exactly welcome in polite society. And of course, mining, as you can imagine. There's everything from morphology, sentence structure, verb conjugation, vocabulary. There's a whole couple of pages here of dwarven words that you can insert into conversation for your NPCs and stuff like that. There's lots of really good kind of flavor for this particular setting's dwarves. Obviously, if you have dwarves like from the Dwarven Mount campaign book, which are literally stone statues brought to life and returned to that way after they're dead, or stuff like that, or if your dwarves are strange worms of the earth who have grown from the various maggots eating upon the corpse of Ymir or something like that, obviously certain things are not going to apply. But if you want a setting that has a bit of a more of a grounded feel and a bit more verisimilitude in that regard, this is damn near required reading as far as I'm concerned. Military weapons and warfare, military formations, how they do it, organize themselves, to basic tactics and strategy. One thing that's good to bear in mind, of course, bearing in mind the Oran Empire setting, the dwarves here are in a constant state of warfare with the various beastmen races, orcs, goblins, and ogres, trolls, and all that stuff. They did not take part in the war between the Orans and the Zaharans in the history of this setting. The Zaharans were the chaos worshipping, southern, more like Stygia kind of feel to them, and they created whole races of beastmen as shock troops through various evil magics. Now the dwarves didn't get involved in that war because it's just like humans on humans. We're just gonna stick where we are. But when the Oran Empire defeated the Zaharans, they were left so tired out and unable to continue any further conflict that the beastmen armies, depleted as they were, escaped off into the mountains and underground, where they started breeding again. You can see the problem. The dwarves are now having some serious trouble dealing with those guys. They already didn't get along with the elves because of the bitter war from generations past. So basically, yeah, they're in a constant state of siege under there, and the classes that they have here in their societies really reflect that. Also, the fact that they have a kind of lopsided birth rate. There are far more male dwarves born than female dwarves, explains why you don't see them that much. And also the fact that they have very little sexual dysmorphism means they're kind of harder to tell apart from male dwarves. It also explains why they protect them so damn much. It's mentioned here, the one greatest treasure in a dwarven vault isn't the jewels and gold, it's their women and children, and they will do everything in their power to protect them. Although there are some classes in here that are female only that are pretty damn powerful in and of themselves. Which brings us to the next chapter, which is chapter 3, the Dwarven characters. So it goes into all the detail, like creating a dwarven class, dealing with dwarven constitution, certain if you're doing a dwarven focused campaign, different options for making sure that your characters, regardless of how you roll them, have a good high constitution, as would reflect a very, very hardy species like the dwarves. And then gives a whole bunch of random tables available for both the Jutting and Meniri dwarven peoples, which are two different ethnicities and subcultures of the dwarves in the Oran Empire. You get build, height, weight, eye color, hair color, skin color, all those things. Ability adjustments by age. The funny thing about dwarves is that they age about the same rate as humans do. They just live much longer. So a 75-year-old human is a very old human. A 75-year-old dwarf is a very old dwarf. He's just got the equivalent of a whole other human lifetime to live through after that. So that also explains a bit. See what I mean about biology informing culture, informing everything else. They have a very conservative culture simply because for half their lives they're old. They're elders. It has an impact on their outlook on things, and their outlook on art, on their outlook on philosophy and all that stuff. This is very, very well examined in terms of that. So yeah, ability to score adjustments because of aging and stuff like that. starting age based on classes, and there's a whole bunch of these. So you have the classes from that were already present in previous books: the Vault Guard, the Craft Priest, and let's see, you have the Fury and Machinist, which were from the Player's Handbook. And if I'm not mistaken, the which one was it? Delver, which was also from that book. There's also whole new ones called the Earth Forger, Furnace Wife, that's the all-female cast. The Excavator, which is more like, specialized in mining and dealing with all the things that come out when you dig a little bit too deep, which dwarves are a little bit of a problem doing. The Pugilist, which is, all punching all the time. They're very much unarmed combat specialists in those regard. The Rhetor, which I mentioned, which is the equivalent of Dwarven Bard and has, special abilities regarding, speaking to large crowds to sway their opinions or to, bring them into a fury or, just put them to just bore them to tears. You also have the Tomb Sealer, which is the Dwarven equivalent to a paladin almost. They basically specialize in combating undead and the, horrors that dwell in, forgotten and lost Dwarven vaults. And you have the Sporecaster, which are a cast of dwarves that embraced a kind of almost druidic or shamanistic relationship with, spores and fungi. They hear the voice of the fungus in many ways, and they can be very useful to have, but there's also a path that leads down a very dark road, the Wet Way, as it's called, that brings you far closer to the fungal primordial fungus than most dwarves would be very comfortable you doing. They may need a lot of fungus in order to, they grow fungus in order to have food and stuff, but yeah, these ones take it a little bit too far at times, so that's something to watch out for if you want to be more in Dwarven high regular society. They're not going to like you very much. So with that also comes not only, the various templates that you can roll on to determine, starting equipment and proficiencies and stuff like that, as with the other Axe books, which is always a really handy way of not only quickly coming up with, equipment loadout and stuff like that, but also determining your position in society based on how much money you started out with, since that's essentially what it comes down to. Like, for instance, the Dwarven Pugilist, that kind of, combat gladiator, combat champion kind of guy. The lowest of it also determines your caste in Dwarven society, determined like that. Like, the lowest is templates called Coward. Cast Houseless. Basically, you ran away from, the entire Dwarven society. Proficiencies are running, survival, and combat trickery and disarming. Basically, yeah, it basically gives you a bit of backstory while you're at it. Whereas the highest one there is Prize Winner, Workborn. They're basically the casts are Highborn, Workborn, Craftborn, and Oathborn. Oathborn are basically the adventuring classes. They have a bit more leeway in terms of, the stuff they can do, simply because, they're outside of Dwarven society so much of the time. And of course, the Houseless, basically, they've fucked off and have either been exiled or just generally not well regarded. Yeah, Oath Sworn, not Oathborn, sorry. And yeah, you have that for all the different classes. That's, chapter 3 and 4. After that, we have chapter 5, which is the new magic system specific for these guys. Dwarven Gnosis. The Earth, whatchamacallit? Earth Forgers. They don't cast, the Earth Forgers and the Furnace Wives do not cast spells as other, classes like, clerics, the craft priests, or like mages do in the regular human society. What they do is that they invoke the power inherent to the stone and metal around them in order to shape them. This is how the ancient dwarves went before the loss of these things with the fall of their one of their major cities, crafted all these great monuments and these great cities seemingly overnight, just shaping the very mountains as they saw fit. And this works in a similar way. It's based on the ceremonial magic system from the Heroic Fantasy handbook, which is very much more of a sword and sorcery kind of thing. It requires a bit more ritual. It requires, concentration and focus. It can benefit from certain talismans and things like that. Whereas regular spells will only go bad if you actually get interrupted and just, in that case, just fizzle out. This is a bit more primordial, touching into the depths of, the environment and the world around you, and that can cause some problems if you let it get out of hand. So things can get botched, or if you go a little bit too fast, or if you just don't roll properly, because these ones you do need to roll for. And can cause corruption if you start delving into the darker aspects of that, because there are some invocations that aren't exactly as nicely seen. For instance, involving using the things that are buried in the earth, such as I don't know, dead bodies. Not exactly the nicest thing for most dwarves to be around, as you can imagine. The Furnace Wives are particularly interesting because they control fire in its many forms, and they can do some pretty nasty stuff. Basically, each invocation scales to the level you want to use it at, and can then be modified based on the circumstances to make it more easier to use. And as such, they can just unleash firestorms and are extremely well regarded in terms of defenders of the Dwarven vaults. You also have, all these different things. The next chapter covers all those. And after that, for the machinists in the crowd, one thing that's very interesting is how these things apply. The Jutland mountain dwarves are very much old school. They are far more interested in fighting their enemies with the traditional methods of the Dwarven peoples. The Maniri ones are a bit more progressive in that regard, if you could say that. I mean, their women actually shave their beards. That should tell you something. At least that's the new fashion there. They also have far more machinists, which are dwarves that focus on building various contraptions, vehicles, weapons out of essentially steampunk technology. They have various automatons, which is the goal of chapter 6 here, which gives you the full rules for designing, building, and creating all these different things, whether it be vehicles, whether it be humanoid or robot type creations, weapons, gadgets, all sorts of stuff, depending on how you want to use them, whether they have a particular what kind of fuel source they use, how much maintenance they require. This is very in-depth. There are literally examples that are literally mechs, so that is definitely something that caught my attention. The war titans, colossal humanoid automatons that resemble the titans of old. So yeah, of course, if you look at the material cost, just the blueprints for this thing requires 51,000 gold pieces of material cost for the blueprints, a labor cost of 51,000 gold pieces. Library workshop requirement is also 51,000. You need to be at least level 9 to build it, and a proficiency modifier -10, which is means it's pretty difficult to build. And what's more, 25 GP maintenance per day. Keeping these things active is not something you want to do all the time. So a lot of times they'll be mothballed until they're actually needed. So yeah, you can build something completely insane and utterly destructive if you feel like it, but it's going to cost you, and you better make sure that you got the skill to pull it off. Otherwise things are going to go very, very bad. But yeah, you have all sorts of stuff. Those are just like, the automatons, as I said. There's even one that's literally a Terminator designed to look like an ogre, to be sent into beastman-infested vaults to destroy them from within. It's programmed with exterminates are not supposed to attack dwarves, but because they're programmed to emulate the behavior of ogres, they sometimes get confused about their actions. So be careful around those things. Oh, this is great stuff. You have various, gadgets and stuff like that, transportation vehicles, all of these things. You don't have to use all of these things. And in fact, if you want to just use these rules for instance, a more widespread, not just dwarves, for a more steampunk kind of, more steampunk kind of fantasy world, well, I mean, this is a perfect place to base yourself on for those kinds of things. Repeating steam ballista. I mean, can you imagine what some players would do with something like that? Oh, man. Oh, that is nice. Yeah, you basically just come up with all the positive and negative the abilities that the device you want has. You go with for instance, its weight, its basic hardiness. Like, you can have something that does a lot of great stuff, but gets taken out with a pinprick if you felt like it. Also, negative abilities if it requires an operator, if it can't move, or if it's has particular flaws in the design that can't really be taken out. So also the interpreting the fuel requirements, and over that you put together to get the net cost in terms of all these things put together. It's very well designed. And then after that you have the chapter on Dwarven domains. This is also useful outside of just the dwarves. If you have a bunch of players who have captured, say, a dungeon, cleared it out of all monsters, and want to use it as like a bunker as their base of operations, well, these rules can actually be quite useful for determining how much it costs them to dig out a certain cave into a full room and, give it to some nice, stone finishing and stuff like that, or how much it would cost to expand a particular dungeon into a full-on underground fortress and stuff like that. This book has some very useful information for you, let me tell you that. And of course, having the domains here, if you have Dwarven characters who then want to create their own, go off and start their own underground city and attract Dwarven followers to build their own vault, I mean, this is perfect for them. Yes, also useful if, for instance, you have some vassals and you're, if you are not a dwarf, if you're a human conqueror who's taken over a great land and includes a Dwarven vault there, who are now tributaries to you, if they're your vassals, well, what kind of tribute do they give? What kind of, stuff do they have to give you? Well, there you go. Easy to find out. Yeah, non-human, non-henchman vassals, all this stuff. All the stuff that really makes acts sing. It's all in here with, a focus on these particular settlements and these particular people. Constructing an elder moot. You have, the entire ruling councils and stuff like that. Because they have a particular legal system and a particular way of ruling themselves, well, here you have the rules for using it to your advantage. There you go. If you want to screw around with you call an elder moot and then screw around with it a little bit using like thief hijinks and stuff like that to gain influence with certain factions and stuff like that. Also includes various maps as well. Dwarven vaults, examples for, how things work out, plazas, water supplies. It shows storage areas, residences, all this great stuff. Battlements, several pages of it. And of course, what book on dwarves would be complete without a section on mining? So this is also obviously very useful for the, it even goes into showing what accounts for the gulf between men and dwarves in terms of their mining productivity. And then it actually goes, okay, here's exactly why. Now, obviously there is, if you want to, it even gives examples, for how the ventilation system works in a dwarven mine. How do they keep, various, gases and stuff done out of the way to keep themselves from, even with their constitution, getting poisoned to death. Lighting, mining tools. Hydraulic mining, because let's face it, with machinists, well, you get some interesting options there too. Dwarven mining mechanics, all this stuff here, and also tables for determining the type of ore deposits, mineral richness, the type of stone that they're going to have to get through to get to it, gemstones, deposit sizes, all that stuff, so that if your players are, even if they're not running it directly, but just, in charge of a mine, well, you can roll on these things to determine exactly what they end up bringing in and determine exactly how much money they have for their various investments, both, civilian and military. Because let's face it, all this stuff is really good if you want to know, should I send my army to capture that mine in order to gain enough ore to smelt a whole bunch of arms and armor so I can resupply my army and go kick some more ass in that direction? Always very, very useful. And also, you have various historical notes here, because all this stuff is based on what we know of ancient historical mining practices of the same eras. So like, Rome and, ancient history and stuff like that. Like, you had, the Weald of Roman Britain had over 24 iron mines producing over 3,000 tons of iron per year, while New Carthage had 40,000 men laboring in silver mines within a 615 square mile area. So yeah, you have basically an idea of like, just how much mining was going on back then is frankly surprising, and that's without modern technology and stuff like that. Roman Empire had a shit ton of mining going on, let's tell you. And yeah, they didn't have the safety protocols, of course, back then that we have now. So yeah, being a miner in ancient Rome was not a very good career path, let me tell you. And of course, the effect of having, different classes having an effect on the efficiency of various mines. Now, so the rules for what happens when you deplete the mine and then digging deeper, which is a very, very, very risky thing. You might find some very cool stuff. you might accidentally get a Balrog in your face, which is statted, although under, different name, obviously. But yeah, if you end up dealing with that, well, you shouldn't have dug so deep. Yeah, you can end up like accidentally flooding the mine if you dug a little bit in the wrong place, or unearthly, or some kind of horrible monstrosity. And of course, here right near Peach 219, you have mining by other races. So what happens when other races that start trying to go into mining? Rules for work gangs, miserable morale from using criminals, prisoners, servants, and slaves to work your mine. Also rules for paid work gangs instead of involuntary labor. So that's if you're feeling like being nice. Oh, salt mines, also useful. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you also have to deal with, because let's face it, salt was really important back then. I mean, literally, salt was worth its weight in gold. Dwarven mycoculture, so mushroom farms and all those things. Guild of Dwarven Brewers, all sorts of different stuff. Like, what kind of booze do the dwarves drink based on their shroom farms? Qualifying for experimental mushroom farming. Fun times. Yeah. Trying out growing different strains of mushrooms to try and get, some interesting effects. What kind of stuff will end up growing there. And of course, you have tables for that. You can end up everything from a pure strain of experimental mushroom with great effects, or you can end up with green slime infestation, giant flies, the mass mutation of the dwarven population into Morlocks and stuff like that. Oh, nice. Oh boy, there's gonna be a lot of fun. Like I said at the start, if you're a Dwarf Fortress fan, this book is perfect for the kind of thing you like. And then of course you have various magical items, dwarven relics from the ancient past and stuff like that. All sorts of cool stuff with their history, of course, because these are like specific, are not necessarily artifact level stuff, but they have their own history and their own background. Various things, miscellaneous items as well. Great things. And of course, by the end of it, you also have a bunch of new monsters as well, the kinds of things that the dwarves have been facing, whether it's strange fungal horrors from beyond the depths, with their own layers, of course. So the maps are actually all there too. The as I mentioned, the what's called Balergir. It's the the freaking Balrog. You can deal with that. But yeah. Old Jutlandic for Flaming Eyed. So yeah, big old fire demon. Various things, the nameless things, tables for nameless things. So if you want some kind of strange Lovecraftian horror coming from the depths of the earth, there's tables for rolling it up and getting not just its basic shape, but also size, special abilities. So you never know what you're going to be finding. And something called a Xenozoa, which is a race of sapient subterranean amphibians who hunt and kill humanoids for pleasure and sport. Any resemblance to the Predator is completely coincidental. Yeah, and it literally says here, what does it say? Yeah, the Xenozoa are reputed to have supernatural abilities such as invisibility and teleportation, but they're actually just very stealthy and highly mobile. So they don't actually turn invisible. They're just really, really good at killing you. Fun times. And the final bit here in the final appendix, designer's notes, which just goes over the basic philosophy of the book, how they, decided to go about it. And going for that, as he said, particular obsession with verisimilitude in world building that Alex has about this stuff. Yeah, this is a great book. I mean, not only is it a good read, the bits with Circanius are, fun read, because you always get the feeling that the guy has his own particular biases, his own parochial view of things, which makes it a fun read because, it's not just, flat exposition. And he even adds a note at the end in his voice here. The so-called designer of this source book, in fact a mere translator from classical Oran into the vulgar tongue you uncouth barbarians used to communicate, has said his piece, so let me say mine. The Cyclopedia is a work of groundbreaking academic and scholarly importance. At no point in human history has so careful a study of the ways of dwarves even been undertaken, and as such it should command your attention and respect. Please do not allow yourselves to be misguided by my translator's misperception of how this book was written. Every word of it is an authentic recounting of my experiences living among the dwarves. I mean, one thing I like about that is this guy, there's a sense of humor involved in this too. But it's also incredibly comprehensive. It sticks to that level of verisimilitude that Axe is known for, and really goes into the detail you want for running that system, as well as any other system that's, even vaguely comparable to it. Like, obviously, the LOTFP, OSC, all the kind of like BX-derived OSR games, you can easily just, port these over. In fact, the first chapter in the introduction has certain, tips and tricks for porting stuff over and converting to those other systems. So that you get plenty of, bang for your buck, even if you're not an Axe player. But for, those of us who are, goddamn right you should get this book. This is great. Not only are you supporting a great RPG company, but you're getting a whole bunch of bang for your buck here. There's a whole bunch of stuff that can be used, even for, known Dwarven campaigns. There's, stuff that can easily be tweaked and stuff. The automaton and, mechanical stuff in this book can easily be used for any other setting. You could do probably a good Arcanum based inspired setting for that, just with these rules. Just combine that with regular magic stuff, and boom, you got yourself you're playing with gas right there. Buy this Axe. In fact, buy this book. How's that? Buy this book, buy this Axe. I didn't even mention all the great art by Michael Sirigos, including the cover here. It's got some great art pieces in there. The whole thing is full color, 270 pages. This physical stuff, it's available on DriveThruRPG and on Autark's own website. The links will be in the description below. I highly recommend checking this out for all Axe Adventurer Conqueror King fans. If you're a major dwarf fanatic, then you definitely should get this. I mean, come on. It's exactly everything you could possibly want out of a dwarf book on dwarves. I have been Zero. Like, share, subscribe, all you want. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.